Hello everyone, this is TobeTada with another video of crypto trading. Thanks for checking by and let's dive right in. So obviously we had this major breakout of Bitcoin here, seen by the spike here, and this was one of the scenarios we were talking about and in a video called Bitcoin breakout scenario, and you can see that indeed it was confirmed a couple of days ago, and we had the spike going up to $5,000, almost $300 here, and then of course followed by a correction going down to about $4,800. Let's have a look at this peak movement in particular and at the larger movement as well. So when we look at this spike here, you can first of all see that there was a total increase of 28%, and that this basically happened within almost 2 days, which is actually already fairly long lasting if you look at other spikes. And the reason behind it is that this is a major spike compared to, for example, down here where we had an increase of, for example, 8%, and this took place basically in a couple of hours here. And the way that this movement occurred was, of course, within the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wave movement. We can also have a little bit of a closer look by going to the 2-hour chart, where this becomes very apparent. We can go back here and trace it to 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 5th wave basically. And this is exactly what our Elliott wave theory would suggest. Of course, this can happen in any way or form as long as basically this pattern is still holds, and that's basically what we saw here. And after such an upward movement, we see of course a correction, and you can see that this is basically the correction here for now. We'll have to see if there's a bigger correction, but for now it's also very clear here that this is a B, C correction here. And it's interesting if you do charting for a while to basically look at the details as well. For example, you could also argue that the correction went down here, up here, and then down here, but the problem with this analysis is of course that the A correction is lower than the C correction. So either this means that we should look basically at the average movement basically, or as we've also seen in the past, that this is not the final correction here. Basically, it could still go down like that, and of course, if we basically look at the 4-hour or 6-hour chart, then these individual waves basically fade away, and we could maybe have a correction such as so, or perhaps so. So we'll have to see what happens, but I thought it would be interesting to have a look at this movement and basically very clearly see this confirmation of the Elliott wave theory here. So if we look at the larger picture, you can see of course that we have had this movement here. Basically here we had this symmetric triangle. I think I constructed it like this last time. Yes, something like that. So I connected it basically by this peak. Here and basically here, and that was really interesting to see that the price definitely held at this resistance line. That was a very good way to predict the price movement here in the short term, and then we spoke again about this possible breakout scenario, which indeed occurred. The alternative would have been perhaps a decrease to this support and then a breakout, or of course there would have still been the possibility of a major correction going down to 3,600. Now let's talk a little bit about why that didn't happen. And I think there is a pretty good reason for why that doesn't happen, because I've seen this breakout in quite a few movements in the past, and I think it's a good thing to share with you. And basically the reasoning behind this is that when you can construct a symmetrical triangle like this, which is basically pointing either upward or downward, excuse me, then you can look at the waves within this triangle basically. And you can see we clearly had what we called the first cycle here, we had a second cycle here, and indeed there would have been not enough room for the third cycle, which would have taken place here. And the reason was that, of course, this B movement was very, very extended. You can see it basically went from down here to here. I'm talking about the A, B, and possible C movement. And when we look at how long this lasted, this was basically 27 days compared to the first cycle of 13 days. So this was double, more than double the time it took for the first cycle. And that was very significant, because basically that meant that there was not enough room here to finish or to complete a third cycle, which would have looked like, if I squeeze it in here, something like that, right? And so when that happens, when there is basically not enough space, the breakout, either going up or down, happens well before the end of this wedge here, basically. And that is very, very significant and important to basically see it within this charts here. And so that's basically the reasoning behind this breakout here. And of course, we also made an basically an attempt to predict the price of this breakout, and we talked about the 4,400 as a first resistance here, which actually did not quite happen, but we talked about the 4,700, which was basically the first 1-2 wave here going there, and the momentum was so strong that you can see it went even up to 5,000, almost 300. I would have expected it to perhaps even go to 5,400, but I guess we could go back and see 5,300, and indeed, did we have a, yes we did. So that was the reasoning. Basically, if you go back, we had a resistance here, and that is coming, that is why we didn't see a price going more than 5,400. It was actually quite well established here. That was the reason for the stop here and not up here. And that is basically a great way to predict a movement and also how high this movement will be by looking at resistances and also then again support lines, which you can see here at 4,800. We see a support here, and now that this spike, so to speak, is not just like a very short-lived event, for example, like we had up here, I think there is definitely room for, at least in the midterm, a movement sideways to even upwards. There is probably going to be another correction here, depending on whether the momentum holds here. That could look like it could go perhaps down to 4,400. That is definitely a very high probability that somehow we'll see a correction going down here. Perhaps I'll just draw it like that. This is not, I'm not quite sure about the time here, but going down to 4,400 and perhaps stabilizing and going back up again, and then we'll have to see, perhaps it will go up to 5,600. Excuse me. that is we'll have to look at that in another video. But that is basically, I think, the possibility here to go back to 4,400 about to potentially 5,600 here, where we have this resistance here and the support basically here. I don't think the price will significantly go further below this point here, just because you can see there is a very steady upward momentum here, and we talked about this as well when we looked at basically larger scope here. I draw too much stuff in here, but you can kind of see it still. We've basically had, you can also see it here with volume, a very steady and significant upward momentum here. So I'd like to stop now, also because my neighbor is drilling, and let me know what you think. I think there is definitely a lot more potential for the future here. There might be, in the long term, more of a sideways movement, but in general, it looks quite good here, like that we're gonna basically, or that we already have been now entered this bull market. So thanks for checking by, and see you next time.